we're glad that you're here. If you need another donut, there are plenty out there. So go have at it. We would love to have those gone so I don't have to eat them all later. But it was great. So again, glad you're here. We're going to continue today to move through the book of Mark. We've been studying the book of Mark over the course of this year, and we have, along the way so far this year, hit almost every single verse through chapter 6. Now, if you were here last week, I originally was supposed to cover 29 verses last week. I covered 7. So there's a little gap in there. So you may want to go back and do some reading there, the first half of Mark 6. But we are going to finish off all of the second half of Mark 6 today. And just so you know, so where we've been, just to kind of give you the last couple of weeks. So Jesus is doing a lot of teaching. This is still early-ish in his ministry, kind of like the first third or so, the first year or so. And so he's teaching a lot and doing a lot of teaching parables a couple of chapters ago and stuff like that. Then he gets on a boat, goes across the lake. They hit a massive storm on the way across the lake, so bad that all the fishermen in the boat are freaking out because they think they're going to die. They make it through that because Jesus calms the storm, right? They get to the other side. Jesus comes in contact with a man who's possessed by thousands of demons. He casts out those demons, sends them to the pigs. They go off a cliff. They get back in the boat. They go back across the water. He meets up with a guy named Jairus, whose daughter is sick. And he comes and begs Jesus, please come and heal my daughter. On the way there, Jesus comes in contact with this lady who's got this bleeding issue that's been going on for 12 years. He heals her just because she reaches out, touches his cloak. In the midst of that conversation, the people come from Jairus' house and say, hey, don't bother Jesus anymore because your daughter's dead. Just tell him, don't worry about it. Jesus says, no, don't listen to them. In fact, ignore them and let's go that way anyway. And so he goes and raises Jairus' daughter. And then Jesus goes home to Nazareth, and Nazareth, they don't like him very much in Nazareth. In fact, they dislike Jesus very much in Nazareth. And so we talked about last week exactly how we could not become Nazareth. How do we make sure that our attitudes towards Jesus are not the same as Nazareth? And so we're picking up the story kind of from there and going through and going to finish off chapter 6 today. So we're going to pick up, by the way, I'll let you know about the follow along. If you want, you can flip around. We're going to move around a little bit today out of Mark 6, but not too much. So if you want, you can scan that QR code or just go to our website if you miss it. All the verses and all the notes are there, so you can follow along with the conversation today, and you can do that at home if you're watching live as well. So Mark 6, we're going to pick up in verse 30. And go through and go into 31, and then we'll continue on from there. It says this: the apostles returned to Jesus from their ministry tour and told him all they had done and taught. Then Jesus said, let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. Now let's unpack this a little bit because we didn't talk about what that first sentence talks about. So last week, one of the things we skipped from here, but hopefully you read later, in Mark 6 was Jesus sent the disciples out 2 by 2 to towns around and had them do ministry on their own, kind of like the interns are doing. We're sending them out and we're like, hey, you're going to go do some things on your own. And Jesus says, don't take very much with you. He said, go and just take bare minimum. You're going to go, you're going to depend on the people there to kind of help you, take care of you, make sure you're connected into the towns where you go, and you're going to do ministry there. And Jesus gives them kind of this heads up. He's like, some of them are not actually going to be very welcoming to you, and you're going to leave them behind. Some of them are going to be very welcoming to you. So one of the things they would do is, and this is kind of different for us today, but they would go into kind of the town square. And if there were people in the town square or around in the town that just didn't have a place to stay, people would just come and invite them. Come stay at our house. For us today, we would probably go, that's a little bit weird. I probably wouldn't want to just invite a stranger to live in my house for a while. But this was what they did. And so Jesus says, go and do this. So they go and do this 2 by 2. They go about this and do this for a little bit. Then they come back. And so they went on this ministry tour. It says the apostles returned to Jesus from their ministry tour, and they told him all they had done and taught. Now, this is one of these cool spaces where I go, I wish I could have sat in that room for a while. Like, we don't get recorded really anywhere all the things that happen with the disciples. We don't get to see all the stories of what they went through and what they saw and what they did, but they just come back, and I can imagine them just kind of sitting around having a meal. Maybe it's around a fire, something like that. And they're telling Jesus all the different things that they got to see and experience and do. And it would have been so cool to kind of sit and hear those stories. But Jesus just sits with them and says, tell me all the things. It says this, right? Then Jesus said, let's go off by ourselves, a quiet place, and rest a while. He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. Maybe you've been in that spot before. You're so busy, you're like, eating's just not an option. There was a day a couple weeks ago where this happened to me. I had to get a new car recently, not because I wanted to, but because my truck died. And I cried a little bit that day because I love that truck. But it died, and so I had to figure out, what am I going to do? I got to try and get a new car before this completely goes kaput, right? I spent the whole day one day just driving around looking at cars, and I left in the morning, and I called Becca around like 3 o'clock, and I'm like, okay, I'm coming home. And she goes, okay, I'm making dinner. What'd you eat today? And I was like, I haven't eaten anything today. It's 3 p.m, like I hadn't stopped once. I drank coffee that morning, but that was all I had, right? And sometimes it just hits you. You're busy, you got projects going, you got things going on. Stopping to eat is just like not worth it, or you don't have time, or you don't even think about it. Jesus got there. The disciples were in that space. When you have a day like that, it's not like Jesus, if you talk to him about it, it's not like Jesus doesn't know what that's like. They had so many things going on. They go, we don't, many people. So Jesus says, we're going to take some time, we're going to go. I want us to see this. And this is going to tee up where we're going to go next week in our new sermon series, that rest is a gift and a commandment from God. It's both of these things. Jesus stops the disciples and goes, hey, he goes, we're going to go away and we're going to rest for a while. Now think about Jesus' mission on earth. He had very few years to get done what he was going to get done. And there are even times where he says, we need to call time out, we need to go away, and we need to rest for a while. That's where we're going to go when we start our new sermon series next week. I'll give you a little preview just quickly. We're going to start it next week. It's going to go for a few weeks. It's called Real Rest. Tagline is, do less so you can be more. Listen, this is something we all probably need to get better at. And here's the thing. This is the perfect time of year to do it. Right? Schedules are a little bit less. Now, maybe you have a job that's busier in the summer. I know that happens for some people. But honestly, the schedules are a little bit less. There's not as many things going on. The days are longer, so it feels like you've got more time. This is something that's important. And Jesus, in these verses, pulls this out and says, we need to go away and we need to rest. So I would encourage you, come back next week, come back the next few weeks. This is what we're going to talk about. How do we do rest? What does that look like? And how do we be obedient in that? So here's what I want. Let's go back to those two verses 30 and 31. I just want us to see this for a minute, right? I just talked about it, but I want to drill down on it one more time. The apostles returned to Jesus and from their ministry tour and told him all they had done and taught. Here's the question I want to start us off with today. Do you ever just sit with Jesus and tell him about everything going on? This was the reality of that conversation. They just sat and they told Jesus what's going on. Now, here's what's easy, and I know this is easy to let happen because I do the same thing. Prayer, it's very easy to make prayer the thing we have to get done to make sure we tell God about what we need. It's a different conversation than what's happening here for the disciples. They sat down with Jesus and told Jesus about what was going on. And Jesus sat and he wanted to know and he wanted to listen and he wanted to hear. I think sometimes we need to take a break and just sit down and just go, Jesus, this is what's happening, right? This is what's a struggle. This is what's hard right now. This is what I'm trying to figure out. This is what's exciting. And how many times do we do this? Maybe it's just me, maybe it's you too. Here's what happens. Well, Jesus, this is difficult. And just saying it. Just saying it. And just letting it live there. Because here's what Jesus doesn't do to us. Jesus doesn't go, we don't say, Jesus, this is hard. Sometimes there's action we should take. But Jesus just wants to hear. He wants us to sit with him and have the conversation. So how often do we sit and just say, this is what's going on. This is how I want to describe this to you, or this is how I want to have a conversation with you. And I think this is important. Sometimes what Jesus requires of us is not doing more, but resting more. See, what Jesus could have done in this passage, he had these guys that just went out and did ministry. Right? They went out on their own for the first time. They came back and they went, this is all the things we've done, right? Here's what Jesus could have said. He could have went, great job, guys. Here's what you need to do better. Here's point 1, 2, and 3. Let's get a good night rest and you're back at it tomorrow. It's not what he does. He actually says, okay, he hears all the things you're doing. And he goes, all right, we did all that work. Now we need to go take a rest. Now we need to go away. We need to rest a little bit more. This is what we're going to talk about when we dive into the sermon series next week. So come back. If that feels like you, if you're like, man, everything right now, struggle, it's a lot, going crazy, all this stuff, how do we find that rest? That's what we're going to talk about over the next few weeks. So I'd invite you to come back. But here's where we keep going, verses 32 to 33. So this is what they did. So they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. But many people recognized them and saw them leaving. And people from many towns along the shore and got there ahead of them. This is crazy. Okay, think about this reality. There's people, they're just trying to, the idea was this. They kind of took the boat and they're kind of going, they're out a little ways from the shore, but they're kind of floating along, looking for a spot to stop where there's nobody there. Maybe you've done this before. You found a spot along a lake or along a river, and you kind of, if you're canoeing or you're boating or something, and you just find a spot and you're like, okay, this is a quiet little spot. We can hang out for a while. That's what they were trying to do. But the people are following them along the coast, running to where they're going. People are literally following them on the coast, watching where they are, and chasing them down the coast to beat them to where they are. This is the reality. Thousands of people are chasing Jesus. Like, this is the picture we should have in our mind, because we're going to see in a little bit that there's thousands of people around. They're just chasing him. This is like paparazzi on steroids, right? They're just going after him. Jesus turned the world upside down, and people were chasing him to be close to him and to see what he could do. Verse 34, this is what it says. Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat. What did he just say they were going to do? We're going to go rest. What happens? He gets to a spot, people everywhere. It says, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. Here's what I would have been like if that happened. I would have been like, get out of here, right? Go away. I'll see you on Thursday. Leave me alone for a while. It's not what he does. He sees them and he understands who they are. This is the way I would say it. Jesus sees them and not just the aggravation they are causing. You know what's often true? We see people for the aggravation they're causing. They show up at the wrong time. We don't want to deal with them. They come ask us a bajillion questions. We don't want to answer a bajillion questions, right? We will often see people and the answers they give us or the way they're interacting with us, and they're so frustrating, and we forget to see them as people. I'm sure this was aggravating for Jesus. He's just trying to get away. Guy can't even eat. And they're right there. But it says he sees them as sheep without a shepherd. He says, I need to shepherd them. They're searching for him because they don't know where else to go, and they're lost without him. So he says, I'm not going to let that be. I thought about it this way, that people aren't just problems to Jesus. I think what can also happen is we can think through and go, man, I'm glad I'm not that much of a problem for God. Like, they got problems going on. Listen, we are all problem people. We've all got our issues. We're all the people that Jesus died for. But he doesn't see us as just the problem. In fact, he came to fix the problem we have. And he did that by dying and then rising again on the third day. He took all of our problems. He doesn't just see our problems. He sees us as people. And this is why he wants to sit with the disciples and have these conversations. And he wants to sit with us as well. And when these people chase him down, he doesn't just say, get out of here. He says, I will teach you. I will shepherd you because you don't have anywhere else to go. How often do we need to see people not just as problems, not just for the aggravations they cause, but we need to see them as people and love them the way Jesus loves them. It is oftentimes not easy, but if we're going to live like Jesus, this is the way we are to live. Verses 35 and 36 is what it says. Late in the afternoon, his disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the nearby farms and villages and buy something to eat. This is very logical by the disciples, by the way. They've tried to find somewhere secluded. They did, but everybody's there, so it didn't really work. But now they're in a place where it's not necessarily easy to get to the things that they need to get to. When I lived in Pottstown, I had a Target and a Giant I could throw a rock and hit. Now I live in Bowmansville. It is not short to get anywhere anymore, okay? So, I get this. He's like, we got to go somewhere. We got to let them go. They got to eat. It's getting late. And probably, if I'm just being honest, right, the disciples from the beginning are kind of like, we're still hungry, Jesus. Like, we didn't get a chance to eat either. We tried to get away from these people. They followed us. So they go, if we can send them away or if we can go get food, then that would be a good idea. So this is very logical, but here's Jesus' response in verse 37. He just looks at them and says, you feed them. What? And then they say this. This is the logical, the answer. With what, they asked. I love this. I love when Jesus just messes with the disciples, because I think that's partially what he's doing. He goes, you feed them. You figure it out. And they go, with what? We don't have anything. And then it says this. We'd have to work for months to earn enough money to buy food for all these people. Here's what it says if you look at a different translation. It says it would take them 200 denarii. Now you go, how much is that? It's 200 days' wages. So like 8 months worth of work is how much it would cost to feed all these people. They go, we don't have this much money, Jesus. How are we supposed to feed them? So then he goes on. He asks the question in verse 38. How much bread do you have? He asked. Go and find out. They came back and reported, we have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Now, they gather this all up. Think about this. 12 of them go to thousands of people. This is what they come back with, a Happy Meal. Okay, some kid's lunch. Because if we look at other gospels, this is what it was. It was a kid who brought a lunch. Now, I know it's Father's Day, but here's what I want to point out about this. Maybe you've never thought of. The mom who packed her kid a snack is who God used to provide in this story. Okay? They all ran and took off after Jesus. This one kid was going to go, and he took off, and mom said, wait a minute, you're going to get hungry. Nobody else thought of this. Mom did. That's typically how it goes, right? If dad was in charge, he'd be like, let's just go. We're going to go, right? Mom packed a snack. And this was, by the way, what then God used to provide for all of these people. And here's what I also think is true about when the disciples come back with 5 loaves and 2 fish. The disciples thought 5 loaves and 2 fish were going to prove their point. Think about this. Why would you come back with 5 loaves and 2 fish? Why would you? Why, with thousands of people around, why would you walk back and go, here's what we've got, Jesus? I think, maybe it's just me being cynical, I think they came back and went, see, Jesus, this is all we have. We cannot feed these people. They thought this was going to prove their point. And yet Jesus doesn't take it that way. In verses 39 to 40, it says, then Jesus told the disciples to have the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of 50 or 100. Now you might say, why 50 or 100? It's just because that's how they would distribute the food. So they gather, they kind of rope in and they get a leader for each group, and that's just how they're going to distribute it. So verses 40 to 41, Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up toward heaven and blessed them. Then breaking the loaves into pieces, he kept giving the bread to the disciples so they could distribute it to the people. He also divided the fish for everyone to share. They all ate as much as they wanted, and afterward the disciples picked up 12 baskets of leftover bread and fish. A total of 5,000 men and their families were fed. Now, why does it say that? 5,000. Now, we think of this and we go, feeding of the 5,000. Well, really, if you look at what this actually means, commentators believe it was about 15 to 20,000 people that were actually there. When you think about this miracle, and this is one of the things I read as I was studying this week. This is one of the greatest miracles other than Jesus rising from the dead. To take 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, to take a kid's lunchbox and go, we're going to feed thousands of people. And then, by the way, right, the disciples gather up the leftovers, and they have more at the end than they did at the beginning. I think Jesus looked at them in the end, just kind of winked and went, yep, see, told you. Told you we had enough. This is what's true. When the disciples thought they didn't have enough, Jesus knew they had plenty. He didn't need them to even have anything. In fact, when you think about what they've just gone through, right? Watching Jesus calm the storm, watching Jesus cast out demons, watching people raise people from the dead. Like, coming up with lunch should have been easy. And yet they still thought, and we're this way too, we see things happen in our lives and we see, look at how great God moved. And then we go, the next thing shows up, and we go, what are we ever going to do? Disciples were the same way. But Jesus knew, even when the disciples came back and they say, we don't have enough, Jesus knew they had plenty. And this is what should start to shift in our hearts. This is what, we're going to see this over and over again from the disciples, and we need to continue to work on this because they saw it in real time. They saw it with their own eyes, and they didn't get it. This is what needs to continue to happen in our own hearts and minds. When we know Jesus, we should start seeing earthly problems as opportunities for God to work, not just simply as the problems that they are. So we know this, right? Logically, There's going to be problems that happen in life. There's no way around that. Something bad's going to happen. Something's going to go wrong. All the things, right? It's going to happen. How do we respond to those problems? Do we see them as just the problems and we need to figure out how to fix it and we need to figure out all this stuff, right? Especially dads do this, right? We go, I need to fix it. I need to find out a way. I need to get the part, or I need to work on the problem, or I need to make more money, or I need whatever. We're going to find a way. We're going to work on fixing it. And sometimes, yes, that's exactly what we need to do. But here's the other side of it. Sometimes we don't know how the problem's going to get fixed, and we need to look at Jesus and say, okay, God, what are we going to do? How is this going to work out? How is this an opportunity to see God do something only he can do rather than just a problem for me to fix? And it doesn't mean just kind of going like that and going, well, God's going to figure it out, and we just step out of it. It doesn't mean that. But it also means when problems come up, we don't freak out the same way as someone who doesn't know Jesus. We look at it and say, what's God going to do through this? Because Jesus knew exactly what he was going to do. So going on from there, verses 45 to 46, it says this: immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and head across the lake to Bethsaida while he sent the people home. After telling everyone goodbye, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. So he puts the disciples back on the boat. He says, go across Bethsaida. I'll see you over there. He goes back. He tells all the people goodbye. He sends all the people away. It's getting late. And then he goes to pray. But this is what it says in verse 47 to 49. Late that night, the disciples were in their boat in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was alone on land. He saw that they were in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the wind and waves. Listen, this is the second time now where Jesus said, we should go across the lake, and they end up in trouble. If I'm a disciple at this point, I'm like, Jesus, stop telling me to do that, right? I don't want to get in the boat. I don't want to go across the lake at night. It doesn't turn out well for us. So this isn't as bad of a storm as before, but the wind is in their face. They're having a big problem kind of rowing across, and this is not going well. It says about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came towards them, walking on the water. He intended to go past them, but when they saw him walking on the water, they cried out in terror, thinking he was a ghost. Now, this seems kind of like a weird situation, but just put yourself there, right? This is 12 guys in a boat trying to cross a lake. They're probably aged like 17 to 25, somewhere around there. So you know they're arguing with each other, fighting about how they need to do it, who's rowing at the right time, who needs to do this, who needs to figure that out. And this is not going well. This is 3 o'clock in the morning. They're already tired. They've been doing a lot of stuff all day. They are frustrated. They're upset. And now they see this person walking on the water near them, and they lose it, right? This is a great movie. If anybody ever makes movies one day, do this, right? This is a situation that's crazy. And they see him and they think he's a ghost, but then they realize he's not. Now, there's an interesting little phrase in here, right there, kind of 3/4 of the way down. It says, he intended to go past them. That's weird. He knows they're struggling, so why would he want to walk past them? That doesn't seem to quite add up. But this isn't a new concept. And you might ask that question, right? Why would Jesus walk past them? Why was that his intention? There's actually 2 examples of this in the Old Testament. We don't have time to dig into either of them, but I'm going to give you the references and kind of give you the brief story. There's a moment in Exodus, chapters 33 to 34, where Moses has this happen with God. He actually asks to see God's glory, and God says, you can't handle experiencing my full glory. So he kind of puts him into like a cave, a cleft in the rock, and says, you sit here, and I'm going to walk past you. I'm going to pass by you, and you will see me that way. He does kind of the same thing with Elijah in Kings 19, where the idea is he's going to pass by. This is the idea. Listen, Jesus intending to walk by them is not because he's ignoring them. It's not because he's just going to beat them over there and show them he could get there faster on foot than they could on boat. This was the idea that he was walking by them and showing them that he is God. They would have known and understood that when God passes by, this is the idea, that he's passing by as a callback to how God interacted with Moses and Elijah in the Old Testament. And going to verse 50, it says they were all terrified when they saw him. But Jesus spoke to them at once. Don't be afraid, he said. Take courage. I am here. Now, Here's the thing we miss sometimes when we don't read this in the Greek. This is not just him saying, I am here. This is him saying, I am, as in he is God. Jesus isn't saying, like when you were a little kid and you got afraid and you had a bad dream or something like that and you cried and your mom or your dad ran in and they went, it's okay, I'm here, right? That's not what he's doing. It's partially that, but it's also to help them understand this isn't just I'm here, so you should just be comforted because your buddy's here, the person who's in charge of you is here, the adult that is in charge of you is here. Like, it's not just that. It's this idea that he would say, I am. And in fact, in the Greek, this is how we would read it. It could just be I am. Ego eimi is how you say it. And then we would call this back. It's the same phrase, or if you look at it in Hebrew, as in Exodus 3:14, when God's talking to Moses, he says, I am who I am. Listen to me. I always hit this nail on the head because I want you to hear this because I hear too many people say it. People will say Jesus didn't claim to be God. Wrong. This is where he claims to be God. In word and in action, he literally plays this out and says, I am God. This is a callback. They would have understood this from the Old Testament. So here's what Jesus does. Jesus shows he's God by walking on the water. Jesus tells them he is God when he gets to the boat. And then this is true. We didn't see this yet, but we'll see it in the next verse. And the wind becomes calm again. When Jesus shows up to them in their distress, the storm calms again. So let's just go to that verse, 51 to 52. It says this, but then he climbed into the boat and the wind stopped. They were totally amazed, for they still didn't understand the significance of the miracle of the loaves. Their hearts were too hard to take it in. Now here's what I want to see, right? Jesus shows up. Every one of these situations we've seen over the last few weeks, Jesus shows up and the whole idea changes. You infuse Jesus into any moment, the landscape changes. The storm's calm, the wind goes away, the demons are cast out, death is gone, all of those situations. He shows up and things change drastically. And here's what I want us to understand, because look, if we see the way that the disciples are in this situation, we go, you just saw him feed thousands of people. What are we doing with this? But here's what two things I want you to see and understand about this. You don't have to have God figured out for him to use you. Listen, sometimes, and I hear this from people sometimes in our church and in all the churches I've been a part of, we think if we don't have God figured out or we don't have all the things in the right way or all the ducks in the row, God's not going to use us. Wrong. Because the disciples did not have this figured out. They saw Jesus do all of these things, and then they're still kind of amazed, and I think in that space of like, who is this guy? Like, how can he do all these things? Every time he shows up, it's different, and he does all these crazy things, and they still just don't quite see it. Listen, you don't have to have God completely figured out for God to use you. But here's the other side of this we need to understand, that you don't have God figured out when he does use you. He'll use you in ways, when you are available and faithful to him, he will use you. It doesn't mean that you have God all figured out and other people don't. In fact, the more we know and understand who Jesus is, the more we go, oh my word, I do not understand this guy. He's so much bigger and more powerful and more amazing than anything I could have known and understand. This is playing out in real time for the disciples. Hopefully it's playing out in real time in our lives as well. That we see him move and do things and change things and just in ways that we didn't know and expect. And it doesn't mean we need to have it all figured out. It doesn't mean we do have it all figured out. But Jesus, in his grace, says he will use us anyway. And here's the other thing I want us to know and understand. Don't be so hard-headed that you can't see Jesus when he's right in front of you. It says they're hard-hearted. I'm going to say it hard-headed because I think it just makes more sense for our context and we understand it a little bit differently. But here's what can also happen. People will pray and they'll say, God, we need your help. We need your help with all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And then somehow they figure out the problem or somehow the problem is fixed. And they go, whew, lucky we figured that one out. Instead of giving God the credit. Like, and I don't mean we need to over-spiritualize every little thing. But at the same time, when God does show up, even if it was the kid whose mom packed him a snack yesterday or the day before, we don't just go, man, good thing that kid was here because Jesus needed something. No, God provided the mom who was smart in that moment. The same thing can happen with us. When Jesus shows up and does something, when we pray and we ask God to show up and we need him and he does it and it's amazing, don't just say, oh boy, glad we dodged that bullet. No, give God thanks. Look at Jesus and say, thank you for what you've given me and the way you worked that out and the way you planned this and the way that you provided. Even when I didn't know what providing was, you showed up and provided. in those moments. The last few verses of Mark 6, we won't dig into them too much, but we'll wrap it up in a minute. 53-56 says this: after they had crossed the lake, they landed at Gennesaret. They brought the boat to shore and climbed out. The people recognized Jesus at once, and they ran throughout the whole area, carrying sick people on mats to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he went, villages, cities, the countryside, they brought sick out to the marketplaces. They begged him to let the sick touch at least the fringe of his robe, and all who touched him were healed. So this idea that Jesus shows up and there's a mob of people, still happening. He ain't getting away from it. And they continue to show up. And it says in this situation, just like the woman with the bleeding issue, they show up, they touch his robe, they're healed because they have faith that this is what's going to happen, because they believe Jesus can change everything. So how do we put this into practice? By the way, interesting, right? These are two of Jesus' most famous miracles, right? Walking on water, feeding the 5,000. Even if you don't go to church very often, you've probably heard this. In fact, walking on water is kind of like a colloquial thing, like, oh, somebody thinks somebody's so great, like, oh, does he walk on water too, right? You kind of make that joke. When we think about these miracles, sometimes it's hard to identify with them or grab onto them because they're so amazing. None of us are ever probably going to walk on water. Probably none of us are going to take a Happy Meal and feed thousands of people, okay? It's probably not going to happen. So how do we do this? And in fact, over the years, people have tried to explain these things away. There's a whole logical, it's not logical, but there's a whole idea that they would try and logically explain how Jesus did these things. They would look at walking on water, and they would say, maybe he just was on a sandbar, right? Maybe you've seen that at the beach where you go out a little ways and you're up a little bit. Like maybe Jesus just found this sandbar kind of going across. Or maybe he was actually on the shore and the disciples didn't realize it. They thought he was walking on water. Maybe he wasn't. He was out in the middle of a lake. He wasn't on a sandbar, and he wasn't just walking on the shore. And even there's this explanation that maybe he, for the feeding of the 5,000, maybe he stored a bunch of food away, and then he would go to the cave where he stored all this food away, and he would load it into his sleeves, and then he would give it to the disciples, and they disperse. I know, it just sounds dumb when you start to even think it through. No, Jesus actually did these miracles. He actually did walk on water. He fed 5,000 people. We don't need to explain away what he did. And so how do we apply this? What does this look like for us? There's a couple ways, and then we'll boil it down real simple to walk away. Number one, I would say this: if you've got a problem, give Jesus what you've got and let him work. Room aside, we're dealing with all kinds of different stuff. We've got problems. I'm sure if we went around the room, we're not going to. We just talk about what different problems or challenges or things we've got going on in our lives right now. What do? One of the things that we can do that is the best thing we can do is we can be faithful and available to Jesus, and we show up and we be faithful and we give him what we have and we let him do the work. Now, here's what I would also say. This doesn't mean only the times when things are going wrong that we are faithful to Jesus and expect him to work. In fact, one of the best ways to do it is when things are going well, to be faithful to Jesus and to give him what we have, so that when things go wrong, we're ready for those moments. In faithful obedience, we show up, we give him what we've got. And when we look at what we've got, it can be so easy to look at what we've got and go, I don't have enough. I don't have as much as that person. I don't make as much as that person. I don't have this resource. I don't have this going on. I don't have enough. But in those moments, we show up and we say, I'm going to give God what I've got. I'm going to allow him to work. And then I would say this, right? See Jesus for who he is when he does what only he can do. This is some of what we've been talking about the last couple weeks of praying expectant prayers too. We don't just pray and go, well, just see what God does. We'll figure it out. No. Pray and ask God. Plead with him to show up in our lives. Say, God, I expect you to do amazing things. And it's not just what we want, but it's what, God, will you do what only you can do? Can that be the prayer? It's just, I don't need you to do what I need you to do. I need you to do what only you can do. And it changes everything when we start to pray that way. Because honestly, what we want God to do is often too small. And we should ask him to do what only he can do. So boil this down to three things. Here's what I want us to work on. Number one is this: be with Jesus more. We have been talking about this all year, being in our devotions, engaging with Scripture 4 out of 7 days a week. That's what our goal is. But here's the thing too: don't just make it a checklist this week. Think about the way the disciples interacted with Jesus earlier in the day when we were talking about it, right? Verses 30 to 31. Just sit with Jesus and tell him what's going on. Like he's a friend. Like he's a family member. Not just with a list of, here's what I need you to do for me, God, and I'm on my day. Just sit with him and tell him what's happening and allow him to hear it. Allow yourself to say it. And it feels weird sometimes, right? Because you're like, I'm just talking to myself. You know what? Which they say really intelligent people talk to themselves, okay? So just say you're intelligent, all right? But just hand it to God. And just say, this is what I want. So just sit with him. Just sit with him a little more. And give Jesus what you've got. We may not think it's enough. We may not. The disciples didn't either. With Jesus, anything we've got is plenty. And God asks us to give him everything. Think about this. When God asks us to give him everything, do you know how much we really have to give God? Nothing. We have nothing. We have the lives and the breath that he gave us. That's what we have to give him. You think he really needs that? But he asks us. We give that over to him. It's not much. He says, I can do great things with the little you've got. So don't be afraid to give it to him. The little things, don't hoard them from God. Give them to him. And then see Jesus for who he is. We don't want to, and I'm ragging on the disciples for a minute. I know this. I love them. They're great dudes. But here's the thing, right? They just watch him feed 5,000. Then they're like, I don't know who this person is. Okay, listen. See him for who he is. Don't read these stories with us where he does all these amazing things and then go, I'm not really sure like who Jesus, no. Trust him. Believe in who he is. Believe that in our lives, he can do things that only he can do. Like he's worth us giving our lives to. And not just say he's some good guy or he's some guy, he's a magician that figured it out, right? He's someone that's worth giving our lives to. And see him for all the things he does. And say, Jesus, what little I have, what abundance I have, whatever it is, it's yours. And ask him to do things that only he can do. And when those problems show up, whether it's feeding people or it's trying to get through a storm, ask him to be there. Know that when he steps in, everything changes. And the more we depend on him, the more we sit with him, the more we have conversation with him, the more we invite Jesus into those issues, the more he's willing to just walk with us and be our shepherd and to carry the load with us. He says he'll do that. So whatever the problem is, whatever those moments, be with him more, give Jesus what you've got, and see him for who he is. Let's pray.